everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where today I'm going to tell you about what I read in January. So we're going to start with the first book, which is In Order to Live, A North Korean Girl's Journey to Freedom by Yeonmi Park. This is her memoir about escaping North Korea when she was about 13 years old. And this was fantastic. This was really, really good. It was, it's obviously a harrowing journey. She describes her life growing up in North Korea. She has a sister with her two parents, and they lived in a town very close to the Chinese border. And she just talks about how they kind of went from a pretty good middle class kind of status level to losing that when hardship came in North Korea. And it's just incredibly emotional to read about her life. And the thing is that no matter how many times I read about or I hear about the story of individuals who have fled North Korea, it's always a mystery to me. It remains a mystery. You always leave with more questions. But how did you? And when did that? And then how could you? And I think she describes very well the sort of mind washing that comes within the North Korean regime. So it's really, really quite fascinating. Especially because what's interesting is that she actually had quite a lot of access to foreign media. So she actually played Nintendo. She watched Korean dramas, and she had access to newspapers. So she had a lot of access to Western media. And so when she describes how it was very common that even if North Korean people had access to that media and they watched that media, they still had Kim Jong-il's, and Kim Jong-sun was the original, but yeah, Kim Jong-il's sort of words in their head, just saying, oh, North Korea is the best, the Americans are bastards, they're still trying to kill us and take our freedom and things like that. So it's really, really amazing how she describes all that. And so then the story follows on about how she actually escapes North Korea into China. She discusses her life in China, which was horrific and awful, but even within such an unfortunate circumstance, she actually was quite fortunate. So it was, but I guess people who have an unfortunate circumstance don't quite make it to write a memoir. So you have to take that into consideration. But yeah, she was she was quite fortunate with her circumstances, that she was able to go through the period in China without too much emotional damage, which is, good, obviously. But yeah, she discusses about China, and then she also describes how she flees China to go into South Korea and create this new life, and how she sort of became a spokesman for people who escaped North Korea. And it's just really, really, it's fascinating, it's terrifying, it's harrowing. She writes incredibly well. She did have aid, of course, because English is not her native language, but she writes with such candor. She's very frank, she's very upfront, she's very honest. She doesn't try to hide anything. I think she tries to find the humanity in people, the good in people, and I think by doing that, not only does it sort of explain people's motivations, but I think it also helps her cope with her situation and what she had to go through. There were two parts, though, that just absolutely frustrated me. It's shows parts of humanity that I just cannot understand. I cannot comprehend why people are like this, and it's why I'm very against certain things. But there's one where her way of escaping China is via this missionary. And at this one point, she was part of a group. So they were all separated into groups, which basically determined which order they could go. They would be led across to China. And she was part of this one group, and the only way she would be led across to China was if she prayed to God. And at one point, the missionary said, "You haven't prayed enough, and you haven't revealed all of your sins. You're hiding something." and because of that, I'm not gonna let you go to China. And that just killed me. That was so frustrating, because for you to claim to be a man of God, to be all, I am holier than thou, I am religious, God is my only being, God guides my morality. If you're that person and you're telling someone who has suffered, like obviously suffered in a way that you can't even imagine, that no, I'm sorry, you haven't prayed enough to my God, you can't go to China, that's disgusting. That for me is disgusting. It's a whole reason why I hate organized religion. I pretty much hate religion, to be in general, to be honest. I'm perfectly fine if you believe in something else. That's very understandable. It is hard, even for me as a scientist who's a very rational person. I like to think logically. Yeah, this whole concept of where do our morals come from? How do we, all of this, it is intriguing, and it does make sense that you would call for something. But when you push your own beliefs onto someone else and deny them something because of your beliefs, that's just, for me, that is intolerable. And for her who has gone through a horrible childhood with starvation, disease, lack of education, constant fear of her parents being taken away, of her being taken away, seeing death in the streets, dogs feeding on corpses, people stealing, the excrement from their neighbors so that they sell it as manure, and then having to go through China, having to go through the sex trade in China. I mean, to have all of that and to say, I'm sorry, you have not prayed enough for your sins, you can't go to China. That for me absolutely killed me, and I think for me that was one of the worst parts of the book, because I just don't tolerate that. That's just you can believe in God all you want, but if you force that on someone, you're a terrible person. I could care less. You're a terrible person. And one thing that I really like about her is that, she feels anger with him logically, and it's interesting because she says it was very easy for me to pray to his God, because it's the exact same thing we had to do to North Korea anyway. We had to repeat the words of our dictator to survive. And for me, I thought that was very clever that she said that. I really, really enjoyed that. And then, so then there's another part like this. It was in South Korea, when she is, basically when North Korean refugees escape to South Korea, they are put into the sort of institution for a month, which teaches them about, modern ways, how society has changed, reteaches them the real history of North Korea. And so they go through all these training courses, and this woman, I believe it was a woman who was one of her aides, basically asked her, did you do any sex trade while you were in China? Basically judging her for surviving, surviving. Basically, she was in a world where it was either be killed, be captured, sent back to North Korea to be killed, or to survive in whichever way you have possible. And she's being judged for it by not only a woman, but someone who works and who knows the situations of North Korea. So that also, yeah. But in any case, this book was fantastic. It was a wonderful memoir. It has, fantastic photos from her child, which is really interesting to show, what seems like a very, very normal childhood via photos. But when you know the background, it's incredibly fascinating. And yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely a book that's worth reading. And she's also on YouTube, and I really enjoy her on YouTube. So I will also link her YouTube channel in the description box so that you can read this and then go check out her channel. And that's it. That's all I read in January. That's it. One book. I did actually try reading 2 other books, and I gave up on them. The first book was A Quiet Life by Kenzaburo, which was the first book I chose, was the book that I chose, and was my first book of the year in my superstition video. And I got halfway through, I got to page 120 out of 230, and I just gave up. This book was just so boring. It was boring. I couldn't do it. I mean, I love Kenzaburo Oe. He has some incredibly hard-hitting fiction. He explores the dark sides of humanity, the sides of humanity where they exist and you probably have thought of it yourself, but you don't want to admit it is because you know that it's not a good thought, and it's not your fault for thinking it. It's perfectly normal, but you do feel shame for thinking about it. And so he's very good about writing books about that. And this book was just had none of that. It had nothing of what I expected from him. It really was just A Quiet Life. And even my friend told me when I told him how boring this book was, he was like, well, what did you expect from a book called A Quiet Life? So I don't know. I mean, what is it about? It's about this girl. She's 20. She has a handicapped brother, and her parents go abroad to the US to live for a while because her father is a writer and he's going there for sort of like a writing program, but he sort of has his own depression, and her mother feels like she needs to accompany him this time so that he can sort of pull through this. So our main character is left behind with her brother and she has to take care of him. And I really thought there'd be, you know, I thought there'd be something behind that. I thought it was a very interesting story and that there could be a lot to it, but nothing happens and I didn't care. And I just, you know, it has one of those scenes that I don't really like in books where characters will discuss a movie and sometimes they exist, sometimes they don't. I don't know if the movie they discuss here actually exists, but all three characters had a different interpretation of the movie, and you're just like, well, which one's the right one? Which one is relevant to this actual book? Because that whole scene, I don't know, 10 pages, and I'm like, do we care? Does it have it? I didn't like this book. I thought it was boring. I recommend any other book by Kenzaburo other than this one. Unless you like it. I don't know. I like boring books, but I couldn't do it. And the other boring book I couldn't get through was Darkness and Summer by Takeshi Kaiko. This is the second book I've tried to read by him. Not tried to read. This I tried to read, didn't make it. The other book, I had enjoyed. What was that called? Into the Black Sun. And that was about his time when he was a war correspondent in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And I thought that book was really interesting because it gave you a very rare neutral view of the Vietnam War. So, you know, as an American, you read so much about the Vietnam War as an American, and then if you go any deeper, then you'll find out about the Vietnamese side. But a neutral Japanese viewpoint on the war, I thought was very interesting. So I liked that book. But this one, I couldn't care. I did not care. This was about a man and a woman who find themselves both abroad, one in Germany, one in another, but they kind of reunite. And they were once lovers back in Tokyo, but they were very much not lovers in so much a romantic sense, but lovers as a, you know, full lust and passion. But there was, you know, a lot of darkness in the relationship, and they get sort of they plunge back into that in Germany abroad, and it's beautifully written. I mean, the way he describes, I would not want to read this in Japanese. It would be way too hard for me. But the way he just uses his language and he describes everything is really, really fascinating. I think that's why that pushed me to all the way halfway through. But I just did not care about the characters. I hated them. I hated everything they did. And I just didn't care. So I gave up on that one. So yeah, I read one book this month of January. I abandoned 2 more. And that's it. Thanks for watching. Bye. See you in my next video.